Hello, my name's Kayla, this is Cinnamon, Peaches, and Sage, and this is the first episode of my Pokemon competitive series. The goal of this series is to help people think more deeply about competitive Pokemon in order to build more successful teams and make better choices during battles. Today's topic is going to be team composition. A lot of people think of team composition in terms of type coverage, but we're actually going to be diving a little bit deeper than that. Not that type coverage isn't important, but when I'm personally building a team, it is not the first thing I'm thinking about. What I'm thinking about when I'm building a competitive team is which role each Pokemon will play on my squad. To get the point across that we shouldn't start with type, I'm going to be looking at 3 Steel-type Pokemon that each play very different roles on competitive teams. These are 3 Pokemon that I personally built competitively and have had a lot of fun with. And these are Zacian the Sweeper, Corviknight the Tank, and Klefki the Support. Let's start with Zacian, who's an example of a sweeper. A sweeper's goal is to hit hard and fast. They are basically glass cannons. If they don't hit fast and hard and take out their opponent and they get hit, they may not survive. But if they can outspeed their opponent and do enough damage, their opponent just can't hit them. You also want to keep in your mind whether or not your sweeper is a physical sweeper or a special sweeper, meaning they have higher physical attack or higher special attack, because there will be situations where in terms of type coverage and effectiveness, moves will do neutral damage. When they do, you need to decide which Pokemon to send in based on whether or not they're physical or special. For their nature, you want it to raise either speed or their preferred attack stat, and you want it to lower their non-preferred attack stat. In terms of items, anything that's going to either boost their speed or their attack or special attack, depending on the Pokemon, is definitely a good thing for sweepers. We're talking the choice items as well as Life Orb. Alternatively, it can be very nice for your sweeper to be able to survive at least one hit. This is when items like Focus Sash could come into play. For their movesets, sweepers tend to have powerful, accurate moves, sometimes with high crit ratios and also with priority. It is best most of the time for your sweeper to have type coverage within its moveset, meaning if you have a fire type sweeper and you only give them fire type moves, that's probably bad. I would also like to note that some sweepers have a move or two that help them boost their stats. For example, it's common to have the move Substitute to put up a bit of defense, and then the move Dragon Dance to raise stats. Once you've got that whole setup done, the Pokemon sweeps, and you're usually pretty good to go. If it ain't broke, am I right? To get back to Zacian as an example of a sweeper, it was so good that in some formats, it actually got banned. It had its stats perfectly aligned to be a sweeper, it had a great move, it had a great ability, and its type coverage made it so that it could usually survive at least one hit, which most sweepers cannot do. Other examples of sweepers include Pokemon with abilities similar to Protean, like Greninja, Cinderace, and Meowscarada. Regieleki is another sweeper, fast, and it hits with electric moves. Hydreigon is another sweeper, though that one tends to be more set up with Substitute and Dragon Dance. Also for these examples, I'm giving Pokemon that have been good in formats previously. They may not necessarily be good in whatever current format there is when you are watching this video. Alright, moving on to Corviknight, who represents the tank. The goal of tanks is to outlast the opponent, because if you can't die, then you can't lose. You basically set it up so that you slowly whittle away your opponent while you're just sitting back behind your defenses, healing, and whatnot. The focus in terms of stats is more on HP, defense, and special defense. Just like with sweepers, you want to keep in mind what type of tank you are. There are going to be tanks that are more defensive and tanks that are more special defensive. Just like with sweepers, the stats in certain situations can be more important than the type. Typically, tanks will have natures that either up their defense or special defense and lower their non-preferred form of attack. The best item for a tank is almost always leftovers, but since only one of your Pokemon on your competitive team can hold leftovers, you can't have duplicates of items, you could also give some tanks berries. There's also an item called Black Sludge that works very similarly to leftovers, but it only heals poison type Pokemon, so be very careful. For moves, any sort of healing moves like Rest or Roost, Protect or similar moves to that are also very useful. Any sort of stat boosting moves can be helpful, especially if you're trying to raise your defense or special defense, as well as status moves, because as you're sitting back, if your opponent is slowly dying from poison or burn or something like that, that works out really great. Sometimes tanks won't even need attacking moves, though be very careful with this. It's usually better to have at least one attacking move, depending on the situation, so that you don't get yourself stuck in a situation that you just can't deal with your last Pokemon. Going back to Corviknight as an example of a tank, it was fantastic. It had Roost within its move pool, allowing it to heal up over time. Additionally, it could learn Iron Defense to raise up its defense, and Body Press, which used its defense stat as the attacking stat rather than its attack. So it was raising its defenses, it was healing, and it was able to hit using its defensive stat. Other examples of tanks are obviously the classics, Snorlax and Blissey. Umbreon has been a really great tank in the past, and it has a lot of utility. And one of my personal favorite tanks, because it can hold the Black Sludge item, Toxapex. And finally, let's look at the last role a Pokemon can play on a team, support, with our example, Klefki. The support role is a very strategic position within a Pokemon team. The goal is to set up your team for success and do a little bit more. A lot of times I see supports not do enough within a team, so you really need to plan for that and more. Otherwise, your support is going to come off as almost like a wasted slot on your team. In other words, supports tend to be kind of difficult to get right, but if you do get your support to work correctly, it can be the difference between winning and losing a match. Because support Pokemon are so based around a strategy, all of the parts of building them are very specific to the individual Pokemon. For example, Klefki has the ability Prankster, which will allow its moves to go first. Because of this, I don't really need a lot of speed on my Klefki. However, for other support Pokemon, speed might be very important. Support Pokemon moves tend to involve a lot of setup. Moves like Reflect and Light Screen, any sort of weather setup, Trick Room, terrain moves, any moves that are helpful in double battles like healing and helping your ally or lowering both of your opponent's stats. There is a wide range of things that your support Pokemon can do, and because of that, there are a lot of options for moves. Sometimes you might not even need attacking moves on these support Pokemon. But again, as I said with tanks, you have to be extremely careful about doing this. Klefki was actually the first support Pokemon that I ever built competitively. It was so fun because its Prankster ability allowed a lot of its moves to have priority. That meant that with my Klefki, I could set up screens to protect my entire team. I could also use Swagger to make my opponent confused, but still not really be able to hit me all that well because of the screens, and then I would use Foul Play to get the Pokemon to hit itself with its own raised attack. That's the kind of shenaniganry that you can get out of these support Pokemon, but as you can see, they are extremely particular to build. Because they're so difficult to build, if you're very new at competitive Pokemon and you're watching this video, I recommend that you mostly focus on sweepers and tanks, and as you get a little bit more experience with competitive, start trying to build those support Pokemon. Often support Pokemon are the key to your strategy, so you need to really think about how you want them to play. Other examples of support Pokemon include Cresselia, who was iconic for setting up Trick Room. There was the Tapus, who set up the terrain. In Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, we have Cyclizar, which has some shenaniganry around Substitute. We've got Palmot with Revival Blessing, and we've got Glamora with its ability to put out Toxic Spikes. In conclusion, when you're building a Pokemon team, I highly encourage you to think about more than just the type coverage of your Pokemon. The Pokemon's role often matters more than its type, and understanding how these different Pokemon interact can be key to winning battles. I hope this video gives you something to think about, and if you have any questions or ideas for future videos, make sure to let me know in the comments. If this video taught you something new, make sure to like. If you want to see more, make sure you click subscribe. I'm also on Twitter at Kayla Capsule, and I run a Discord called Capsule Monsters, which, yes, has a competitive Pokemon section. I hope you have a great day or night, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!